You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're here on the unceded traditional territory of the Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This is Bernadine Fox, here with my co-host for the week, Dawn Wright, bringing you Both Sides Now. You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox.
And I'm co-host Dawn Wright.
And today we're here with Kagan Goh, who is a producer, spoken word artist, playwright, and actor. Originally from Singapore, he's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Kagan lives with Bipolar. So welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm really excited about you coming in because I think it's really important to talk about the lived experience of things. For the rest of us, we have a label and some bad connotations of what certain things are. Or we have book knowledge because we read an article or we went to school or whatever. But that pales in comparison of the lived experience. Mm-hmm. And bipolar is a very interesting one because there's an entire range of things. It's not just one thing. So can you tell us about what it was like to have bipolar prior to diagnosis?
Prior to diagnosis, that's really interesting. I was in film school in Ryerson in Toronto. And I came back and essentially...
How old were you?
I was 23.
Okay.
When I was diagnosed in 1993. And I went traveling, and when I came back, essentially I was hanging out with a lot of street people, homeless people, a lot of street artists. I befriended a friend of mine named Bugsy, who was a street artist, and a bit of a shaman, a bit of a trickster, and a bit of a wordsmith and a genius in my mind. And one day we went into a church downtown on Valentine's Day just to keep warm. And because we were dressed like we were street people, we were given the cold shoulder, and they were staring at us as if we were troublemakers. And when they came to collect money from the collection tray, I handed them a stale loaf of bread, symbolizing the body of Christ. I thought they would get it, but they didn't. They said these two are troublemakers. And when the priest said, after the sermon, you're welcome to come up and share something if you like. And I did want to talk about these street kids that belong to a rooming house called Street Kids in Distress that had been kicked out of the rooming home through a bogus housing bylaw. Basically, rich land developers wanted to acquire their property and build condominiums, and they were starving on the streets. Some of them had pneumonia and they're really sick. So I wanted to say to the congregation, talk to these kids, because they might not be your kids, but they are a responsibility, and talk to your local MLA, talk to your local MP, and advocate for them, and if you're having some food and beverages from this, congregation after the thing, bring it to them and talk to them. And that's all I really wanted to say. So I got up to speak to them, and I was told by two church helpers, two ushers, two altar boys to follow them into the basement, where they cornered me and said, what do you want to say? And I was in a bit of a paranoid state of mind. And I saw them as spies in the house of love, kind of like imposters, where the institution of religion had taken over and the Spirit of Christ wasn't there. I was kind of in a psychotic state, I guess, without realizing this is my first psychotic episode. And I ended up walking out of the basement, and they were chasing after me. And when I got up to the top of the stairs, a cop sprayed mace in my eyes, and 8 cops jumped me and held me and choked me, and I couldn't breathe. And I said, if I keep struggling and fighting them, they're going to kill me. So I went limp, and they let me go, and they threw me in a paddy wagon and took me downtown to the cop shop here on Main and Hastings. And I spent the night in jail. And the police report later on said that I was a drunk native Indian because I had long hair at the time and I was tan. And that I was on drugs and I was drunk and I had assaulted a police officer, which wasn't true. But it was 8 cops' words against me, nobody. So shortly thereafter, I was diagnosed as bipolar, and the charges were dropped. But that was my first episode, and that was my foray into this world of bipolar disorder.
That sounds... what's interesting about that is that as much as you say that was psychosis, you could see the elements of truth blended into what you were experiencing, that these were spies in the house of love. I mean, they certainly weren't treating you like we imagine church people to treat people in need in a house where there is supposed to be this sort of giving and taking of kindness and compassion and. So
well, part of sometimes what I would describe is if you see somebody acting strange or bizarre, maybe you come from the vantage point of saying, in what circumstance would that strange, bizarre behavior actually make sense? Because, the way I describe psychosis or a manic or psychotic episode, it's like dream symbolism. You interpret things in your own peculiar way, which makes sense to you, but only you. And to other people observing, your behavior seems completely bizarre, completely crazy. But if you actually explain yourself, there is a logic even to so-called insanity and madness.
So then when you've gone into these sort of psychotic places, is that what you call it?
Psychosis.
Psychosis. Yeah. Are they all like that, where they have sort of elements of reality in it that you're interpreting differently?
Yeah, I would liken it to lucid dreaming, where you and only you can understand the dream symbolism because it's peculiar to your own psyche, your own makeup, your own history, your own memories, but it makes complete sense to you, but to other people it seems like completely bizarre. And the question is, when you examine this behavior in other people, is to ask them what's going on with them. Two pivotal questions I would say that aren't asked. The question that's usually asked by psychiatrists or by doctors or by lay people to so-called crazy people is, what's wrong with you? As if you're damaged goods or something is inherently wrong with you,
Or at least somehow what's wrong with you at the time.
And that the only thing that can fix it is medication, which sometimes is necessary. But a more prevalent question, which is hardly ever asked, is what happened to you?
Yes.
And there's usually a storyline of cause and effect that makes sense if you actually take the time to listen.
I think also in working with folks who had been traumatized, that they often act in ways that people don't understand or think is crazy. And really the question is really, how is this working for you? Like, even if you're self-harming, how is that helping you? And that's kind of what you're talking about as well, that I would imagine that if somebody came and said, how is this working for you? How is this for you? And give you an opportunity to explain it as opposed to defend it.
Yeah.
How old were you when this happened?
23.
You said that before. 23. So you had no symptoms of bipolar prior to that?
Maybe I had a predilection for it, coming from an artistic family, but not really before then. Not that I was aware of,
And is that common? Does that happen to most people, that it's in young adulthood?
I think there might be some family history. For example, my brother has bipolar 2, which is hypomania and depression. And I have what they call bipolar 1, which is mania or hypermania, which turns into mania, then turns into psychosis, and then into depression. It's considered more severe than bipolar 2.
I think I read a stat that said 2.9% of the population have bipolar, and 83% of them have a severe form of bipolar, and that's what you're talking about. It's bipolar 1?
Bipolar 1.
So what happened after that? You have a diagnosis, and then how did the diagnosis feel to get?
Well, the diagnosis felt like basically I was told that it was like that I had an incurable illness that would last my entire life. And when I heard that, it sounded like receiving a life sentence for a crime that I didn't know what I committed. It's like a life sentence with no parole. And the subsequent 14 years of my diagnosis were really tumultuous. I was riding the roller coaster of having several manic, psychotic, and depressive episodes per year. And my life was completely unimaginable. I wasn't able to go to work or go to school or have relationships, or friendships were very difficult. So essentially, it was very challenging, but the first 14 years were really tumultuous. I had over a dozen hospitalizations.
That's a lot.
Really, it was very challenging, and it was very hard on my family. My parents were pretty much the main people who stuck by me, loved me unconditionally, and stuck by me through thick and thin.
That's good.
And if it weren't for their support system, I don't think I would be around.
So what kinds of things happened that landed you back in the hospital? Was there one thing, or there several things?
It could be a number of things. For me, I've come to understand my triggers. For example, alcohol, overindulgence in alcohol or marijuana. Especially marijuana is a huge trigger for me. It tips me into mania and then psychosis.
So it can actually trigger.
It can trigger, yeah.
And that's kind of what we were talking about beforehand, wondering what causes bipolar. Do they know what causes bipolar?
Well, there are theories that it's a genetic or genetic disorder or biological disorder. But I think the elements that are family history, it can be hereditary. It runs in my family in terms of my brother and I. And I have relatives who have mental illness, but it's not widespread. There are incidents of it throughout my family tree. But I think trauma, for example, like a breakup of a significant relationship, really sent me over the edge. A loss of a job was another one that did it. Any major traumatic or stressful situation can do it. Examples of such things would be a death in the family, or a divorce, or loss of a job, or becoming homeless, for example.
Well, it's interesting that all of those things are also in sort of the stress pool of the kinds of stress people can go under that will actually trigger them into depression. So you're now saying that triggers you into a manic or a depressive state. Am I right about that?
That's very true, yeah.
We have to take a little break, but we'll be right back. We've been chatting with Kagan Goh about his lived experience with bipolar, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough. Just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? bless your soul. You really think you're in control? I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. And I think you're crazy, just like me. Ever since I was little, it looked like fun. And it's no coincidence I've come. I can die when I'm done. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe you're crazy, maybe we're crazy, probably.
Hi folks, Steve Ferguson here, your 21st century schizoid man. I want to invite you to come on down to Prog Rock Alley every Monday at 1 o'clock a.m. So Sunday night, Monday morning, we look at the best of progressive rock. Art rock, math rock, space rock, whatever your fancy, we've got it all at Prog Rock Alley. So again, folks, that's Monday morning, 1 a.m. Sunday night. We're ending the weekend in Prog Rock Alley. I'll see you then.
Listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox.
And I'm co-host Don Wright.
And we're sitting down with Kagan Goh to talk about his lived experience of bipolar. And I don't use the term disorder. What do you think about that term?
Well, I call it a condition, sort of a human condition, because I like to emphasize the health aspect of mental health. In my own recovery, I what was the turning point in my recovery, for example, was making my health my first and most important priority.
What happened to bring you to that?
A number of things. First of all, I was taking lithium, and I thought that was my lifeline, that without it, I would sink. And it obviously wasn't working because I kept having relapse after relapse, and I was so faithful about taking that med. But I eventually switched psychiatrists, and Dr. William Long, suggested I try an alternative medication called Epival, also known as Devalpoex, which is an anticonvulsant for epilepsy. And I thought, how could an anticonvulsant for epilepsy help me, because I don't have epilepsy?
Right.
But they found through experiments that it was sometimes highly effective to treating bipolar. And I was put on that, and almost overnight, my recovery was dramatically changed for the better.
Wow.
I was also put on a very small dose of loxapine, an antipsychotic, to prevent psychotic episodes. And I've been on that dose for the last 17 years and haven't had a major episode ever since.
That sounds like a miracle.
Yeah. I think that certainly there's value in drugs, but are there skills that you learned along the way to help you manage it on your own?
Yeah, another turning point. I mean, medications are important, but there's no one pill that cures all your ills. For example, the wellness strategies that I learned, you probably are familiar with Mary Ellen Copeland's Wellness Recovery Action Plan, or WRAP.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered WRAP through a book called Winning Against Relapse.
Mm.
And it was basically a more detailed version of WRAP, where I learned wellness strategies in crisis prevention, crisis intervention, and post-crisis recovery for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did is it put me in the driver's seat, and I was able to nip episodes in the bud and prevent relapses.
Right.
And it was a turning point in my recovery. I would say the most significant thing was stumbling upon, discovering WRAP,
Mm-hmm.
and practicing it on a daily basis until it became second nature. Those little habits, those incremental habits that you do +1, +1, +1
Mm-hmm.
each day, and taking care of the fundamentals of your daily maintenance plan of eating 3 square meals, nutritious, healthy meals,
Mm-hmm.
getting adequate sleep, 8 hours sleep, not too much, not too little, getting some kind of movement, some kind of exercise. It's like habits like brushing your teeth and stuff like that, and
Right.
grooming seem insignificant to some people, but incrementally compounded, they can really change one's life, you know.
And how did it change your life?
Dramatically, I became a WRAP facilitator for the North Shore Psychiatric Services in Lionsgate Hospital for 2.5 years, where I co-facilitated WRAP workshops.
Cool.
I became a peer support worker for early psychosis intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Douglas College to train as a community social service worker. And through my practicum, I eventually got a job as a mental health worker at the Kettle Friendship Society, which is a mental
Right.
health organization where I've been working since 2009.
Yeah, the kettle does great work.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm thinking that, the skill set that you described must reduce the anxiety because you have a feeling of control over your condition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's true about anyone, even a trauma
Yeah.
survivor. Once they feel like they're in control or have some means of controlling flashbacks and PTSD stuff,
Right.
you end up feeling more confident and more able to engage in life.
Yeah.
Is that true for you?
Definitely, most definitely. It's like receiving a second lease on life. The way I would describe it is everything after since my recovery has been like gravy.
Hmm.
I'm so grateful to have my health. It's something that a lot of people take for granted and just assume will always be there. But when you lose something as precious as that, it suddenly becomes first and foremost very important.
Yeah.
Can I offer 2 metaphors to
Yes.
describe what the bipolar condition is
Yes.
like? The first, most obvious metaphor is the roller coaster ride.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go through hypomania and then mania, where you have these feelings of pleasure, of euphoria, and sometimes it's mistaken for happiness. You feel happy, but it's a brittle happiness, and it eventually tips over into psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, like I described, lucid dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be nightmarish, and it can be pleasurable sometimes. And then what goes up must come down, like Icarus flying too close to the sun. You crash and burn and enter the dark night of the soul, and that's depression.
Right.
And the other metaphor I would use is an open house where you find a fuse box rummaging in the basement, and you flick on some switches and you realize you have lights you never knew you had before, and your whole mind, body, and soul illuminates.
Mm-hmm.
And you discover you've got special gifts. Almost like you feel like you're you can have increased creativity, hyper creativity, charisma, hypersexuality. It's like you're the life of the party. It's like a jam-packed house party, and the music's blasting and everybody's in there celebrating with you. You're
Right.
incredibly charismatic and popular.
And creative.
and creative.
Very, very creative.
And then the
moments.
lights go off, you blow a fuse, and you're in the dark.
Mm.
And everybody leaves, and the house is empty, and you're depleted, and the house is closed. And that's depression, the dark
Right.
night of the soul.
Right.
And the analogy I use of the open house is to only use as much electricity and as many lights as you need. Use it in moderation, no more, no less, what the Buddhists call the middle path.
And are you able to do that even though you go into a manic state? Are you able to use your rap stuff to pull it back?
Yes,
or-
I am, because I think there is a fundamental choice between the gap of stimulus and response.
Mhm.
When one is stimulated by something which makes one excited into a manic state, there's a way of coming down from that, and that's by choosing not to go too high. You can experience some hypomania, which has benefits in some ways, but if left unchecked can be problematic. So I would say any kind of mania is no different from any kind of addiction, whether
Right.
it to be a substance or illicit drugs or DMT, psychedelics. The euphoria or the bliss that one feels
Yeah.
is no different from that. And it's to choose to not just, the word sobriety has a bad sobering connotation, but choose to tamper that and say, I choose to come down. I can go back up another time, but I'm not going to let it go out of control, because the damage it does is too great. It's like the light that shines twice as bright lasts half as long, as, to quote a line from Blade Runner.
Yes.
I heard you at one point talk about a brittle happiness, and that kind of, to me, implies that you might be happy, but it's temporary.
It's temporary and unstable. It's like a stallion, a horse, a mare stampeding on a frozen lake. Any moment you could go through the ice.
Do you
Does it
think
make
it's
it
actually-
difficult to trust when you're in that happy state? Do you find that, I don't know if I can really embrace this because it's going to be taken away? Does that ever come up?
Yeah, most definitely.
I think also it's possible that people, unless they know that they have bipolar, those places that you can get into where you're feeling really good, you just kind of slip into it, and it seems really great and wonderful. And why would you want to not be there, right? Because it can be so wonderful. I wonder has it done any studies to find out what's happening chemically in the brain when somebody becomes manic and then becomes depressed?
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with any studies, but there's always this assumption that what feels pleasurable must be good for you. And we know that there are many pleasurable things that aren't good
like
for
drugs.
us. And
Yes.
like drugs,
Yes.
or overconsumption of substances. And the same thing can be said of mania. It's not really happiness, because happiness is actually okay. But the yin yang of happiness is sadness.
Right.
And it's actually okay to feel those feelings. It's part of the human condition.
Yeah.
We wouldn't know happiness without sorrow, and sorrow without happiness.
We're just going to take a little break here, but we'll be right back. I'm going to continue talking with Kagan about how bipolar has affected his life in other ways.
All day, staring at the ceiling, making friends with shadows on my wall. All night, hearing voices telling me that I should get some sleep, because tomorrow might be good for something. Hold on, feeling like I'm headed for a breakdown, and I don't know why, but I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired. I know right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be me, and talking to myself in public and dodging glances on the train. And I know they've all been talking about me. I can hear them whisper, and it makes me think there must be something wrong with me. Out of all the hours thinking, somehow I've lost my mind. But I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know right now you can't tell, but stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired. I know right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be. I've been talking in my sleep. Pretty soon they'll come to get me. Yeah, they're taking me I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know right now you can't tell, but stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired. I know right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be. Yeah, how I used to be. How I used to be. Well, I'm just a little unreal. How I used to be. How I used to be. I'm just a little
Eoch Tanuyap, Quiget Yuans Queensna. Hi everybody, my name is Quiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
Hi everyone, this is Bernadine Fox from Both Sides Now that airs on Vancouver Co-op Radio every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, is an innovative radio station that gives Both Sides Now an hour every week to unpack mental health. We stay on the air by donations from folks like you. So if you can, visit Co-op Radio, all one word.org, that's coopradio.org, and hit the donate button on the top right-hand side of the screen and follow the directions. Or call 604-684-8494 and talk with someone directly. That's 604-684-8494. And then come join us on Both Sides Now, here every Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Are you living with a disability? If you're under the age of 50, you could be eligible for up to $90,000 in free government money through the Registered Disability Savings Plan. It is estimated that 70% of those eligible have not yet opened one. That's a lot of people missing out on free money. Access RDSP is a non-profit program providing free support to help you access these funds, including Indigenous-specific navigation and a $150 grant to get you started. To learn more, go to getmyRDSP.ca.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox here with my co-host Don Wright, and we're talking to Kagan about his lived experience of bipolar. So, Kagan, you've done lots of sort of incredible things since having been diagnosed with bipolar, and you're continuing to do those things. I believe there's a film and books and all that stuff. But I want to go back a little bit and ask you, just on behalf of our listeners, what's the worst part about being bipolar?
The worst part of it is being labeled, or the stigma and discrimination and prejudice. It's real. It does exist, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's very damaging, and the judgments that come with it, that you're weak, that somehow that you're responsible, that you're guilty for this. And the difference I would describe it is there are no sick people, the only people with sickness. And when you say a sick person, it's like they're damaged goods. You know, it's like they're inherently flawed, or they've done something to deserve this. Whereas somebody with a sickness, they are whole as a person who happen to have a sickness. I mean, when people have cancer, we don't say the person is cancer. But when people have bipolar, we call them bipolars, or people who have schizophrenia, we call them schizophrenics.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
That's
that's
true.
very damaging.
So what kinds of stigma have you experienced? Is it relationship, jobs?
Relationships,
friends?
jobs, pretty much about across the board. And, you know, loss of relationships, rejection, loss of jobs. Yeah.
So are you losing those things because you had an episode and that
Well, I
impacted, or just because they found out and decided that they didn't want to?
both.
Both.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's really hard. I'm sorry that happened to you. So is there a cure?
I think self-compassion, being gentle with oneself, to forgive oneself for the mistakes one makes when one is under the influence of mania, psychosis, or depression.
Right.
That I don't want to say, you know, the loss of insight that comes from being in some of those states, yet at the same time, fully owning and taking responsibility and not just excusing it.
Yeah, it is hard.
And it's really hard.
It is hard
To own it. It's
Yeah.
really tough, because sometimes people won't forgive you, and sometimes the damage is so severe. But one is human and one is flawed, and one makes mistakes and tries to make amends. There's a Japanese proverb which goes, fall down 7 times, get up 8.
I'm just wondering about a lot of your creative activities. Is that how you express what you're dealing with, or is it a management process? Well, how does the creativity fit into your handling of this condition?
Yeah. Well, I come from a very creative family. My father was a poet, novelist, and playwright in Singapore, literary pioneer. And my mother was an editor who edited all his books. And all my brothers are artists in their own right. So I come from a lineage that is very supportive of that. But initially, when I started writing about it, it was like a form of self-therapy, although I don't use my art as a therapeutic tool. But I was expressing these experiences, and I began to go to poetry slams and open mics and poetry readings. And people reached out to me in the spoken word slam and storytelling communities, and they embraced me and took me under their wing and nurtured me and valued me. I got validation and support, and you know, I was kind of dubbed the bipolar poet laureate, you know. And I've been using spoken word and storytelling and filmmaking and my theater to educate the public about mental health issues and fight the discrimination, prejudice, and stigma against people with mental health challenges.
Oh, we're lucky you do that. It's a very important work. How has it affected your relationships with partners?
Until Julia came along, it was pretty troubling.
And Julia is?
Julia is my beloved wife and love of my life, who is right here in the studio with us.
Yes, Julia is in the studio with us, quietly sitting in the studio. And when did that happen? And what made it different?
She was non-judgmental and accepting and loved me unconditionally for who I was.
That's a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. So up until then, it was difficult. So basically what you're saying, it was the person that you were in a relationship with that made the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But you also talk about self-responsibility, and I think it's a hard thing for people to sometimes get, not because they don't want to get it or because they're lazy. It's because they haven't done that thing that is self-responsibility, and there isn't a book that says this is how you be self-responsible when you have bipolar, or do you know what I mean? Like it's an abstract concept. You also talk about advocacy, self-advocacy. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Just to address the first question.
Sure.
Between every stimulus, there's a response. And between that gap, there's a gap there. And between that gap is the freedom to choose.
Yes.
And the choice is always there, no matter how difficult it may be. And you can always choose the better path, or a path of a heart, as I would like to call it, as Carlos Castaneda says.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to say that again. The choice, the path of the...
A path with a heart, as
The path of the
Carlos
heart.
Castaneda says. Says there are paths that lead you nowhere, the paths that don't have a heart, and follow the path that has a heart. Carlos Castaneda is a new age kind of writer who talks about shamanism and stuff like that, so that's a reference to that. But self-advocacy, I think, is one of the most important things, because sometimes we defer and abdicate our responsibility to experts. We assume that psychiatrists and doctors have all the answers and they know best because they've been 2 years of schooling, and that is true. But we need to speak up and not fight, but be our own best friend, be our own best advocate for our own best interests, because they might not know what it feels like to be sleep 16 to 20 hours a day, to be so drugged up to a state of being in a chemically induced straitjacket, as the term would be called, or in a comatose state.
And that's from the drugs that they're giving.
That's from the drugs, yeah. And there were literally about 4 or 5 years I slept 16 to 20 hours a day and only got up to go to the Kettle or the Coast Clubhouse for $1 lunch. That was my existence, and it was not a life that I ever want to experience again.
Do you think they knew that the drugs were giving you
They knew
that?
that.
They knew that.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for people who, hey, you're told that you have this illness, that you're basically not okay, to then get to a place where you're willing to not necessarily see the doctor as the person who has all the answers, because that's what they tell us, right? They tell us, I'm the one that can fix you. You just have to do what I say. But you're suggesting that we need to get to a place of being able to be our own counsel.
Be your own counsel, and if you're not able to do it yourself, have people within your life, whether friends or family or relatives or loved ones, who can help advocate for you. If you don't have the voice yourself, find people who are and have your interests. That's another way of doing it if you are intimidated. But I think it's really important to speak for our rights, to not settle for less than, not that you expect a cure to fix everything, one pill fix every ill, but to essentially try to strive for optimal health as best as possible. Things will never go back to normal the way they were before illness. There's a new normal where essentially we have to adjust to the limitations and the parameters in which we have to live our lives. But we can still find meaning and value in that, and purpose.
And sometimes it gets better.
And sometimes it gets better once there's a sense of acceptance. Yeah. And once one finds freedom within those parameters, and sometimes limitations are just imaginary.
Yes, lots of times limitations are imaginary. It's what we think we can't do that keeps us held back the most. The RAP program, am I saying that right? The RAP program?
RAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan by Mary Ellen Copeland.
I actually think we had a person in before that talked about that, or talked about something like that. Where would people go to find out more information about that?
You can look up her website, mentalhealthrecovery.com. mentalhealthrecovery.com.
And is that something that's situated in Vancouver? Or
No,
is
it's
that,
in the States.
it's in the States. Okay.
But you can get the WRAP books, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan books at Odin Books.
Oh, okay. Odin Books is great.
But you can order those books online too and take programs online.
That's good to know.
We'll be able to list these things on our website so people that check in later can find that information.
But you teach one of those programs.
I used to.
You used to.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the past, I used to put other things before my health, my mental health, such as my career, my interests, my art, my relationships, my family, and I kept having relapse after relapse. And the definition of insanity, according to Albert Einstein, is repeating the same mistake over and over again, expecting a different result. I'm paraphrasing. What finally was the turning point? The analogy I would give is like a train. Imagine a train, and the last compartment of the train is actually the engine, which is your mental health or your health, and it's actually pushing the train forward. But there's lots of traction, and the going is really tough, and there's a lot of resistance. That's because you made your health your last priority. When you put the train in front of the train and it's pulling the train along, this momentum, and the going is easier. What used to be impossible, or what seemed impossible once, has finally become possible. And when you make your health your first priority, whether it's through following the fundamentals of eating, sleeping, and movement and exercise, even just those basics could be the cornerstone of changing your life. And essentially, I believe in turning mental health to mental wealth, as I would call it.
I think that's on your T-shirt.
Yes.
Just from mental health to mental wealth. And it has a yin-yang sign with what looks like a face. Is that a face?
It's a face. It's a smiley face modified
Yes.
with one darkened side to be like the frowny frown, and one is smiling. It's like the mask in theater of a tragedy and comedy.
Is this your T-shirt?
I designed it.
Ah, it's a wonderful shirt.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get a picture of that from you, and we'll put that up on our resource page too, because it's lovely. Anyway, I interrupted. So you're talking about putting your mental health in the engine and not in the caboose, so that everything that you're doing is in fact propelling your life forward towards mental health and mental wealth.
Mental wealth. I mean, for example, I once was making a film called Stolen Memories, and I kept making the film my first priority, and I kept having relapse after relapse, and I was told to actually quit filmmaking, that I'll never be a filmmaker because it was too difficult, that it was actually making me sick. But it was my whole attitude that I was willing to sacrifice my health for the film, which was the problem. Once I actually made my health my first priority, the film actually manifested and was realized. It took me 15 years to do it, but I actually completed it against great adversity, and I had to prove myself that I could actually do it, because I had been blacklisted in the community by producers and broadcasters because I had a mental illness. I was a liability,
So, having done film myself, I get it. I mean, in the film industry, everything goes away, right? That's it. That's what you do 24/7, and you do everything to get that film put in the can and done. So how did you get the film in the can by putting your mental health first? Did you have a schedule that you were able to stick to, or did you have to build your schedule around?
I had a schedule which was realistic, that didn't sacrifice my health, that I got adequate sleep, adequate food, adequate exercise, adequate rest, and it was just actually manageable, as opposed to trying to fit myself into a pigeonhole or something which would actually send me over the edge.
I imagine supportive people is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, building a team which is supportive and understanding and actually would help me,
So you built a schedule that worked for you. That was what you needed.
Yeah, and pacing myself, being realistic.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you, Kagan, for coming in and chatting with us, and thank you, Julia, for sitting in and hanging out with us as well. This has been great. There's a lot of information about bipolar that is going to be very valuable for people, and especially the stuff about how to achieve wellness in it. So thank you very much for coming in.
Well, thank you, Bernardine, and thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Chris Nam Chatlam, not let's man manate. Next it was Lolam, last questions Lolam, Lachais Locum, not Jim Quatlinoch. This is deer hunting song.
Snowath, Tuesdays 1 to 2 p.m. A program celebrating First Nations languages and cultural topics, including history, poetry, music, and spirituality. Snowath broadcasting on Vancouver Co-op Radio from the unceded Coast Salish territory every Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and syndicated on UBC CITR 101.9 FM Wednesdays 4 to 5 p.m.
When I get better, you'll be mine, and we'll go dancing all the time, and I'll be beautiful and thin. My dress will show a little skin, and I will never think of dying or call you up at midnight crying. No, I will only laugh and smile, and you'll feel careless like a child, and you'll say that you can't live without me, and you'll write all your songs about me when I get better. If I get better, when I get better, I swear it's true. I will be taking care of you. My cruel hands will soothe your aches. I'll only give and never take, and I will always pay my bills, and I will always take my pills, and you will have nothing to fear. You'll be so happy when I'm near, and you'll say you love me, say you need me, and I'll say it right back. Believe me, when I get better, if I get better.
The Culture is thrilled to present the Vancouver premiere of Ronnie Burkett's Forget Me Not, February 4th to March 1st. Forget Me Not will run for 4 weeks in a secret location, revealed to the audience members before the show. Welcome to the new now, a time when written language has been suppressed and forgotten, and hand-drawn love letters have become a powerful act of defiance. Unlike anything previously experienced, this mysterious and thrilling new production offers each audience member the rare opportunity to hold a one-of-a-kind Ronnie Burkett hand puppet, becoming a puppet chorus. The audience both witnesses and propels the story as it unfolds, an inspiring theatrical love letter for increasingly uncivilized times. For more information, visit tickets.theculture.com.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and that's our show. We were entertained by Matchbox 20, Gnarls Barkley, and Sarah Jigling and her Good Bad Luck, along with Sherry Ulrich. Thanks to Kagan for giving us an inside view of his Bipolar 1, and thanks to Don for co-hosting and Steve on the sound. But most importantly, our thanks goes out to you for joining us today. If you have questions or feedback about this program or want to share your story or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, bothsidesnow@coopradio.org, or via Twitter @BothSidesNowBC. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.
I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights. And it's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Yeah. Why don't I wonder how you know? Well, surely you don't have all of the facts. You could be just making it up. Why don't I ever think of that? It's some kind of magic in the words that you breathe, saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Everything's gonna be alright. With anyone else, it's such a cliche, just words people say to be nice. Or somehow when they fall from your lips, I'm convinced you're right. When I'm weary and so tired, when I'm worn out and done, when I fall off the wire again, with no more strength to get back on, there you are with that voice in my ear, saying the words that I need to hear. It's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe that when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Oh, everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. Yeah, yeah.
All right, the auction's on and send them on the money. 20 divided to 5, divided to 30, divided to 5, say $50 and sold to 100.5 FM, CFRO Vancouver Cooperative Radio. We thank you.